just wish I could remember my wife." "We've been through this, Daryl. You don't have a wife. You never had a wife. You have to get over this." Daryl twitched as he hung his head. This was his remember tell, that twitching foot. People had different places that they hid memories, and his was in his foot. It would sound strange to anyone who didn't know, but people didn't always hide memories in their mind. Sometimes they hid them in places that would help them never quite be lost. The tap of a foot, the snap of a finger, scratching an ear. There were a lot of ways to remember, and she was never quite able to pull it all out of him. "I know that," Daryl said. Tap, tap, tap. "But sometimes I remember her. It's usually when I'm on a date or I'm making dinner. I'll be listening to a podcast or talking about hiking or something, and there she'll be. I see her red curly hair, her piercing green eyes, her white teeth." But he trailed off then, shaking as whatever he had been remembering escaped him. Tap, tap, tap. I don't even know her name, but I know we were married, and I can't seem to remember what happened to her." Dr. Winters chewed on the end of her pen, thinking of strategies to make this his last session. "Well, why don't you drink some tea and lay back and start with what you can remember? Then we can look at it and see what's going on here." Obedient as any dog, Daryl drank the tea and laid back. It must have burned his mouth. She hadn't meant for him to chug it, but it was a mental suggestion that she had implanted in him, and he did it without thinking. Poor Daryl would have some toasted taste buds tomorrow, but that was probably the least of his worries, and a problem for later Daryl, to be sure. At the moment, she still hadn't figured out how to get all the memories this time. As he lay there, pouring his heart out for the 5th or 6th time since she had brought him here, Dr. Winters rose from the chair and went to stand over him. His head lay against the arm of the couch, the other side having no arm, and she reached down and touched his temples as she let her eyes roll back and her breath become comfortable. She didn't need to see the memories there, the ones that shouldn't be there. She could have read Daryl's whole sad marriage word for word by this point. In truth, Daryl had been married. He had been married to a woman that had turned out to be less normal than he had thought. Winter knew what the term for that was, but it barely mattered. She was a leech, a psychic vampire, and she'd been draining him of his will to live for 5 years, at least the 5 years that they'd been married. "We met my first year of college," came the whispered words, and she saw a younger Daryl as he walked into his dorm room for the first time. He had a box under his arm, the rest of his stuff already here after many, many trips, and a gleam in his eye that wouldn't last. He was in his freshman year of college, writing a scholarship that would ensure he got the bachelor's degree in engineering that he wanted. He had his whole life in front of him. He had everything to win or lose. He had met her at a freshman mixer, a woman a year older than him that had bright red hair and inquisitive green eyes. He couldn't remember her name. Winter had taken that from him, at least, but he could remember more than he should. He remembered the way she had laughed at his jokes, though couldn't see the put-on for what it was. He could remember the smell of her hair when she flipped it behind her, strawberries and cream. He remembered the way her hand had felt on his when she touched it, and Daryl was in her grip from then on. He had never gotten his bachelor's degree, but they had started dating after the mixer. She had been a culinary arts major, but she soon stopped going to class and pestered him to do the same. He was so smart already. Why did he need the classes? She could miss one or two, so he could too. It wouldn't hurt him. Didn't he want to see her? Didn't he want to spend time with her? So, of course, he had begun to skip classes, and, of course, his grades had slipped, but he was still doing okay. He was getting by, doing okay on his tests, and studying when he could. College was his first real sense of freedom, and she was his first real relationship that felt like it existed. Daryl had dated before, but never like this. This felt real, substantial, and he didn't want to lose it. He hadn't noticed the drain yet, the tiredness in the morning or the mental fatigue, and he wouldn't for a while yet. She was devious, his soon-to-be wife. She took sips then, not gulping for meals. She wormed her way in slowly, in no hurry, and Daryl just chalked it up to the tiredness of doing something new. He drank a little more coffee, took vitamins, and slept a little harder when he slept. He was young. These were things that he could get over. It was fine. At first. He was getting ready for midterms in his sophomore year when she dropped a bombshell on him. She showed up one afternoon just before class, crying and saying she was leaving college. She had lost her scholarship. She couldn't afford tuition. They were going to put her out of student housing. She had no choice but to move to a new place, somewhere that she could afford. She wanted Daryl to come with her. She couldn't lose him, and she sounded so pitiful that he couldn't help but give her what she wanted. Daryl left college, packing all his stuff in a U-Haul that she had rented, and then they left for Hanover. I loved her. At least, I thought I did. For a while, they had been happy. His family wasn't happy. Neither were his friends, but he and his girlfriend were happy. He got a job doing something mindless, something that paid the bills, and it paid enough that she could stay home and keep the house. They were a happy little couple, the two of them. But Winter wondered if they were really so happy. Daryl certainly thought he was, but that was around the time his health began to deteriorate. He started losing his hair. His skin lost its luster. He slowed down. He was tired a lot. It didn't matter to him. Daryl was happy, and that was all that matters. What didn't make him happy were the phone calls from his family. When are you going back to school? What will you do without school? This was your dream. How can you just abandon it? Daryl understood, but as they kept telling him what was best for him, she wormed her fingers in. Who are they to tell you what to do? You are your own man, and you shouldn't have to take that from them. They kept asking, and she kept telling, and eventually, Daryl stopped answering their calls. First it was his parents, then his brother, then his uncle and aunt, and eventually they stopped calling. His friends kept calling, kept coming around, but she began to poison him against them as well. They didn't approve of her. They were against her. They wanted to separate them. His friends had never said anything against her. They generally liked his girlfriend, but the means was already there. Daryl stopped taking their calls too, and before long, it was just the two of them. They got married not long after, Daryl wanting something that wouldn't abandon him like everything else. And for 5 years, they lived as husband and wife. She had separated him from his family, from his friends, and that's when she began to really work on him. It started subtly, little jabs about his weight, his job, his lifestyle, but soon it really blew up. Daryl was fat, he was worthless, he was good for nothing, and good at nothing. She rode him constantly, never ceasing. He lost his job, his savings dwindled, and still she picked at him. His body entered a state of exhaustion, and Daryl found himself losing long tracts of time. He would sit on the couch, only meaning to rest for a few minutes, but he would pass out and nap or just sit in front of the TV and zone out. Then she would yell at him about that too, and over time, it all changed. Over time, even my body saw her as the enemy. While this was going on, she only got younger. She looked exactly the same, her skin radiant, her hair lustrous, her eyes sparkling maliciously, but then she began to go backwards. Suddenly she looked 25 again, then 22. Before long, people thought she was his daughter instead of his wife. Still, she picked at him. Look how good she looked next to a fat old man. And Daryl became, well, not angry, but suspicious of how she was doing this. Winter delved deeper, trying to find it. It was almost there, like something stuck between your teeth, but she couldn't quite grab a hold of it. It was infuriating. Winter could feel the anguish Derek had felt every time she tried to catch it, but it always managed to slip through her fingers. She went deeper, delving into his psyche, looking for the threads of that last painful shard. Something had changed inside Daryl. He no longer saw her as his loving wife, as his world, but as some inescapable other. She had done so much to break him that his body had begun to react to her presence. His stomach would hurt. He would get irrationally nervous around her. He would sweat profusely, and his days and nights were becoming akin to living with a bear. Daryl hadn't understood, but Winter did. His body had been affected by her for so long that it saw her as a threat, even if he didn't. It had entered a kind of fight-or-flight mode, and one night it had chosen to fight. They were eating dinner. Daryl was having the pork chops that he had made, and she was having him. She was talking about how bad the pork chops were, how soggy the vegetables were, how she wouldn't have expected anything less from him, on and on and on, and that's when he saw it. He looked up, something he hadn't done in quite a while, since he didn't often look her in the eye, and he saw it. She was talking, but there was something sliding into her mouth. It was a constant stream of string, a neon wire of energy, and he was horrified to realize that it was coming from him. She was eating him, devouring him a little at a time. And suddenly it all made sense. The hair loss, the weight loss, followed by weight gain and lost teeth, the sallow skin, the lack of sleep. It all came down to her. When she noticed him looking, she smiled at him through her venom, realizing that he was realizing what she was doing too. Put it together, huh, Porky? Took you long enough, and it's too late anyway. I've done it before, and I'll do it again. I'll eat you up, and then go find another sucker for my dinner. Daryl couldn't be sure if he had actually heard her say it, but when she smirked, her eyes asking what he meant to do about it, that was when he decided that she had to die. It was her or him, after all. She would have stopped him if he hadn't taken her focus, but she was intent on her mockery, and that was how he had done it. He had put the steak knife in her before either of them had realized it, and it slid out of her neck as she fell out of her chair and shuddered on the floor. She was dead in minutes, and Daryl hadn't had a clue what to do after he had done it. Tap, tap, tap. There! Dr. Winters had it. His foot had bumped the air, a nervous twitch he had developed during his 5 years in hell. He hadn't meant to do it, but Winter almost thought he had subconsciously tried to help her. She had her claws in the last shard of memory, and as she dug it out, she watched herself enter the apartment. She had come there for some reason, called there by something broken and in need, and she had found him slumped over his dead wife as the blood poured between his fingers. She had touched his shoulder, seeing what had happened in a heartbeat, and told him not to bother. She was dead. She wasn't coming back. And unless Daryl wanted to be dead, in the few years it would take Utah to put him to death, then he better come with her. Daryl had hesitated, but he had come, after a little more mourning. He had stepped away with her and walked from the door of his apartment into Kashmir. She tossed the last piece of memory into the sink, letting Daryl get some rest before she woke him up. She prayed that she had gotten all of it this time, and that Daryl might be free to live without the shadow of that hateful creature that had chosen him at that long-ago mixer. He deserved to be happy, for as long as he was able, at least. You're still here. Thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague here. Always a pleasure to see all my new and old viewers coming by for another one of my spooky tales. If you'd like to support the show, you can always take part in one of our channel offers through Fume or Aura, or you can just click on another video when they come up. I'd really appreciate it. For our newer viewers, we also have lots of playlists and other things if you'd like to get caught up. I know some of my series have been going on for quite a while. If you'd like to get my latest book, there's a link down below that'll take you to my Amazon page. Towesey Homestead just came out, so if that's something you'd like to get your hands on, go ahead and have a look down there. If you'd like a signed copy, you can go ahead and email me from my email address on the site, and I'll get with you about shipping information and ship you a signed copy. If you'd like to support the channel in a more monetary fashion, we also have membership through YouTube, and we've got a Patreon that you can get the information for in the description. We have lots of tiers and everything to suit your needs. Patrons that support on the $10 tier, that's our Ghostly Reader tier, get a book anytime I write one, signed and on their doorstep. As you may have noticed, there's a list of patrons and members on the screen, and I'd like to personally thank every one of them for taking a hand in the future of this channel. Well, that's enough for tonight. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.